Okay, so once again, mega autofocus comparison. This is with the GFX100 and it's set to tracking +2, speed 0. We're at 48 frames per second in the 4K. This is the H.265 codec, 400 megabits per second. I'm just gonna see how this tracks. I'm all the way out on the 32 millimeter setting. Walking in here, good, just seeing how this tracks. It's on face detect. I've got a reasonable center spot as well to kind of back that up. Now I'm going to take this lens and I'm going to zoom it all the way in. Now we're at the 64 millimeter setting. Once again with the GFX100, we're at the tracking a +2 speed of 0, and we've got it all the way zoomed in at 64 millimeters. It's on f4 right now. Doing a little walk back here. I'll step out of the frame. Come back into the frame. And once again, this is with the 32 to 64 f4 lens. Okay, so now I'm back. We're at 32 millimeters again. This time I turned the tracking to 0, which will tend to want to drift off of me. It's less locked on. Speed is still at 0. The settings for speed are from -5 to +5. I'm just going to back up a little bit. We're in the 32 millimeter mode, coming forward here. Just seeing how we do. I'm going to do this little zoom in here. Now we're at the 64 millimeter range as far as that goes. And we'll just do a little walk back. We'll pop out of the frame if we can here. Give it a couple seconds and then we'll pop back into the frame and just see how it tracks us coming up. Now we're going to lock it on a little bit more. Now we're back on that GFX100, and now we've got the tracking sensitivity to +4. This is the most locked on setup. Speed is still 0. Once again, that's -5 to +5. We're gonna just do a little walk back here. So this should hopefully stay very locked on to me. Shouldn't drift as much. We will come forward. Good, we'll see what happens when I turn to the side, back to the front. I'm going to zoom this all the way into 64. Good. See how it looks tracking. Once again, this is locked on GFX100. Step out of the frame. And back into the frame. And back forward. Very good. Okay, so now we've got it set. We're at 32 millimeters and we have the setting for speed. The tracking, by the way, is at 2 now, which is middle of the road. And we've set the speed to -5, which is the slowest speed we can get. We're at the widest range of this f4 lens. I'm just gonna move around here a little bit, move in. I'm gonna take this up to that 64 millimeter focal length, which is around 50 millimeters approximately. You can see here, we'll just back up. Once again, slowest tracking setting, out of the frame, back in. I misspoke, slowest speed setting as far as that goes. And we'll come back forward. Okay, so back again with the GFX100, we're at the 32 millimeter range, and now we have the speed set to +5, the tracking to 2, which is middle of the road. We're going to just see, this should be very, very quick as far as the autofocus is concerned. The tracking should hopefully stay fairly locked onto me. Let's take this up a bit and let's just see. Here we are. We've got it at now the 64 millimeter focal length. Once again, the speed is set to +5. We'll step out of the frame here. And back into the frame. And back in. All right, so this is one of my favorite lenses. This is the 45 millimeter lens, and it's a really fast autofocusing lens. It goes to f2.8, really a beautiful lens. We have the tracking on +2, which is middle of the road, the speed on 0. I just want to kind of talk to you a little bit, see how this lens tends to do with the autofocusing on the middle of the road, straight out of the camera. Settings, step out here, and we'll step back in. This is the standard out of camera setting. All right, so the only thing that I changed on this one now is I changed the tracking to 0, which is the quick switch. We'll just kind of see if this drifts off of me or if it can keep my face and eye detect on pretty well. I'm going to step out of the frame. We'll step back into the frame and we'll see how that looks. GFX100, this is the 45 millimeter lens. Like I said, one of my really favorites. It's so sharp, so beautiful. Now we have that tracking on +4, so this is the most locked on that it is. And I'm just gonna back up a little bit. I'm gonna move forward a little bit. Good, seeing how this works. I'll step out of the frame here. And back into the frame. All right, so GFX100. Now I've got the tracking to the middle of the road +2, which is about equally between locking on and drifting or refocusing on whatever you want to have it look at. But the speed is at -5. So we'll see how this, if this can kind of track me or if it's just simply too slow, or does it give us really a nice organic looking filmic or cinematography type focus pull. I'll step out, step back in, and we'll see how that does. All right, so now we have the speed set to +5, tracking to +2. We'll see how this does. Once again, face detect is on this. I'll move out. And I'll move back in. Great. We'll see how that is. All right, I wanted to try this. A lot of people don't talk about the GFX100 and the capability of it shooting 2K video footage. And so it can actually shoot 2K in a 17:9 aspect ratio, 200 megabits per second at 60 frames per second. And it really looks good when it's slowed down. I just have our standard settings on this with the +2 on tracking and 0 on speed. You know, the reason I'm testing this is mainly to see if the autofocus is any better with the 60 frames per second. Panasonic cameras, for whatever strange reason, actually seem to do better with their autofocus tracking when they're at higher frame rates. So at least on the S1H, the GH5, GH5S, it seems like the 60 frames per second and the 120 frames per second on the S1H actually track better. And that's probably because of sensor readout and tying some of that sensor readout to the autofocus points. So we'll just see how this does. This is just kind of a brief interlude here amongst my testing on these lenses. Step out of the frame here and step back in. Okay, this is a real game changer lens. This is the 110 millimeter f2.0, and it is an absolutely gorgeous lens. Great for photography. I haven't used it as much for video, but I want to test it and just see how that autofocus is. So I'm standing about 15 feet away from the camera. This is at 60 frames per second, 125, 1/125 seconds on shutter speed. And I want to just see if that 2K 60 frames per second would be any better. All right. So back to the 110 millimeter lens. This is now at 23.98, 400 megabits per second, DCI, 4K, and we've got it set at a tracking of +2 and a speed of 0. Just do a little walk in, and we'll do a little walk out here. and just see. If you'll notice, the rendering on this lens is absolutely beautiful. So now, once again on the 110 millimeter, and our tracking is at 0, which should be the most kind of aggressive tracking. The speed is at 0, and we'll see how this does. Okay, so now we are at tracking of +4 and a speed of 0. And so this should be the most locked on tracking that we have, and just an average sort of speed. We'll see how this tracks with me, kind of coming up to the camera with my assistant. All right, so now we're back to tracking of +2, which is the middle of the road. 0 to 4, +4 are the ranges for the tracking, locked on and whatnot. This is the speed of -5, so this should be the slowest speed, middle of the road tracking. We'll kind of see if it's able to keep up or if it's just simply too slow. All right, so here we are now with the tracking, or the tracking of +2 and the speed set to +5. So this should be the fastest tracking that we have. We'll just kind of see how it goes as we walk forward here, and if we have good rendering as far as that goes. Thanks for watching. Okay, I'm back again, and I just want to add a few things. Having reviewed my footage with the autofocus on the GFX100, it's really pretty clear that that the best thing that you can do is to set the tracking to +4. That locks on your target. That seems to be the most impactful from what I've been able to garner. The 0, you get a lot of hunting. That's when it's going to really look for different things to focus on. And maybe if you're shooting something that would benefit from that, I can't imagine what that would be, but that would be good. But if you're doing anything where you're videoing kids, you're videoing yourself in a talking head sort of scenario, +4 tracking is really good. I also find that the slowest speed is really not great. Now maybe if you're just doing a static talking head sort of thing and the person's not moving a lot, then that -5 or a -3 for speed would be a pretty good thing. But I think in general, you're probably better off at least going at 0. And I've got it set right now on +1 to give you just a little bit more speed. I'm shooting on that 45 millimeter f2.8 for these conclusions. One other thing that I noticed when I was shooting is that I had a lot of exposure changes in the background. Now, if you have the camera set on face detect and face tracking, I believe that the photometry that the GFX100 does is focused on trying to make sure that the face is properly exposed. And as a photo camera, that's pretty much exactly what you want. And for a lot of the video stuff, it actually does really well. But when you get in situations where you're moving around, the light seems to be changing just a little bit. For example, when I walk back and forth during this discussion point, if I had this with the face tracking on and the photometry was tied to my face, you would see a lot of exposure changes that could be distracting in the background. Now, I'm trying the area tracking and I've taken it off of the face detect. And so we're going to see if that doesn't allow for a more stable kind of background. A couple of things that are unusual about this camera that I would love to see Fuji fix. First of all, when it does change any kind of photometry or it starts to compensate for the exposure, it does it in a very stepwise, ratchety sort of way. And you can see that earlier on in the video. That was a problem with the XH1, and Fuji had a firmware that actually addressed that really, really nicely. I'm hoping they can do that with the GFX100. The second thing is, and I don't know, I can't figure out how to make this work, but I shoot a lot of things in auto ISO when I'm talking about video. And I found that the auto exposure lock doesn't work when you're using auto ISO. So when I hit the button to try and lock the auto exposure in so that I don't get such drastic changes as things are moving around, it won't allow you to do that. It will do an auto exposure lock when you have it set to a standard ISO, but that's really kind of defeats the purpose of using that auto ISO, finding your exposure and then locking it in. I don't know if it's something I'm doing wrong, if I need to work on my lock settings, but I feel like I know this camera pretty well, and I'm struggling to see that happen. So the bottom line is, I think that this camera is a fantastic video camera. The autofocus functionality on it is really, really amazingly good. The lenses are great. The stabilization is pretty incredible. So for a medium format camera to give you high bit rate, really beautiful video, this camera does it. And it is a ridiculously amazing stills camera. Thanks for watching.